either by the immune system to help protect you, or sometimes can be short-circuited by the microorganisms. So when fever response occurs, if it's caused by gram-negative bacteria, the endotoxin, or the LPS, can trigger the cells in your immune system, particularly the macrophages, to produce a variety of different compounds that will set off this response. And these chemicals include the interleukin 1, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and interleukin 6. So these are different chemicals that are produced by your macrophages. So when they talk about the cytokine storm that occurs with COVID-19, some of these are involved as well, right? So macrophages, when they get stimulated, remember the different cells of your immune system have no intelligence. They respond because of signals, because of different chemicals. And so if they're set off in the wrong direction, sometimes can create an overwhelming, unnecessary, damaging response. But when things are good, this response can protect you. But anyhow, let's look at how these responses result in raising your body temperature. So when these chemicals are produced, if delivered in large enough numbers to reach your hypothalamus, it will stimulate your hypothalamus to produce hormones that would be sent to your liver, and your liver response is to increase metabolic activity. That increase in metabolic activity raises your body temperature. So normally your hypothalamus is your thermostat. It helps maintain your constant body temperature so that your chemical reactions can be occurring at its maximum, the optimum temperature. Now, when additional production of these chemicals occur, your temperature will be raised beyond your optimum. So that is why fever is your biggest symptom. Whenever you get sick, you feel lousy. Just the fever will make you feel lousy. Why would that occur? Well, from the understanding, optimal temperature is when the enzyme has the perfect shape to carry out the reaction. The reaction is occurring the fastest. Right now, you're running your chemical reaction at its optimum. When you increase the temperature beyond the optimum, the enzymes now are no longer carrying the reaction at its maximum speed. So reactions begin to slow down. If the chemical reactions within your internal organs are slowing down, your vital organs are slowing down, you are not going to be functioning at your peak. You will feel lousy. You feel lethargic. Don't feel good. Right? So fever by itself is something that will make you feel unwell. And if you take anything to change that, let's say you take a chemical that can reduce the fever, immediately after you have the drug kick in, you feel better already. So that's very important. Then why would your immune system make you feel lousy? Well, the reason for that directly is that when you have an increase in temperature, the increase in temperature helps you control microorganisms that is about to enter. So the protection that is useful is on your skin surface and in your mucous membrane. Those surface temperatures are lower than 37 degrees, your optimum temperature. So right now your skin is not at its optimum. Your mucous membrane is not at its optimum. There are damages that can occur to those areas, and if you are able to raise the temperature of your skin, raise the temperature of your mucous membrane, those repair, those immune reaction to kill off microorganisms at that area would improve, would increase. In fact, I was visiting a buddy of mine from my PhD days. He's now in Harvard. He worked for an individual. Unfortunately, he got fired because he took some more money around where he should. they're in the department of wound healing. So this guy, just from this very simple concept, he came out with a machine that can heat up your skin if you have a wound. So it's just a device that you wear on the surface of your skin that can warm up your wound. That will significantly increase the rate at which your wound will heal. Because normally, your skin temperature is not at its optimal. It's below the optimal. So if you can raise the temperature without raising your core temperature, you can let your wound heal quicker. Right? But normally, your normal immune response, the way they do that is by raising the whole body temperature so that you get the skin temperature to be closer to 37 degrees. Right? Unfortunately. And then as a result, your whole other organs don't function very well if you're lousy. But the goal is to keep you alive, to help you recover quickly. So that's fever response. That happens either as a result of gram-negative bacteria infecting you, which is not good, or your normal immune response triggered by inflammation. So whenever you have an inflammation, the macrophages will produce these chemicals to trigger fever. Unfortunately, gram-negative bacteria short-circuit that, and the result is you have very high fever, and that very high fever can cause your brain temperature, internal temperature to go beyond your maximum, and you can actually die from extreme. At least you start suffer brain damage when you have fever beyond 108, 109, which is like 40 Celsius. Right? All right. So that's the reason for raising your body temperature. So now that we know that that's why it happens, sometimes you can artificially do that. And the second thing is, some organisms are sensitive to temperature, especially those that are professionals at causing infection in certain parts of the body. The best example is this virus called rhinovirus. They are the leading cause of common colds. And we get into the reason why that is later on. But majority of the colds you get in the summer, in the winter, is caused by this virus. And the reason why this virus causes this symptom is because they like to grow on the mucous membrane surfaces where the temperature is around 30-something degrees. The optimal temperature for this virus is 33 degrees Celsius. The body temperature is 37. So they are not going to cause pneumonia because your lung will be at 37 degrees. They like to grow on the mucous membranes. And your maximum temperature, if you remember, beyond the maximum they die, right? Your maximum temperature is 35 degrees Celsius. So if you have a fever and you raise your core body temperature to be above 37, it's maybe 38, 39, you feel awful. But this global raising of the temperature could raise the temperature so that your mucous membrane can reach above 35. If that occurs, the virus would be completely killed. So there are some organisms that are very sensitive to higher body temperature, and the fever response would be a good defense against those organisms. Let me give you tell you a story about this. So when I was growing up in the jungles, no ready access to hospitals, doctors, and things like that. My father would do a crazy thing whenever he gets a cold. So if he gets a cold, he would go out to the backyard. We're living in the tropics, right? It's very hot and humid. He would go out to the backyard, take out his big chopping knife, and go clear the backyard of weeds. You do that for about an hour, completely soaked, and he wear extra clothing when he's doing that. Then when he gets home, he wrap himself up with a blanket, don't even take a shower, right? Get a big pot of tea, hot tea, drinks it, eat 2 bananas, goes to bed. The next morning when he gets up, he's completely well. And I've seen this happen many times because whenever he does that, mom will always start screaming. come on, don't, you're making the blanket all sweaty, and it's very hard to wash the blanket, right? Especially you don't have the washing machine, you have to wash by hand. And as a kid, I always wondered why Dad did that. And one day I got enough courage to ask Dad, why do you do that? Why are you annoying Mom? And he said, well, my grandma taught me that if you get a cold, if you do that, you get well quicker. I don't know the reason. Now I know the reason. The rhinoviruses, when you work out, you raise your body temperature. You drink hot liquids, you raise your body temperature. If the mucous membrane temperature is raised artificially to above 35 degrees, the virus is inhibited. And that's why you recover quicker. Right? So grandma, if you get a cold, grandma says, come, I'll cook you hot chicken soup. The key word is hot. It works. Right? Or perhaps you go to a sauna, raise your temperature. So for some organisms, so that's the reasoning behind fever. But in the case of gram-negative bacteria, it is not good. That fever can kill you, right? If the temperature is way too high. I don't know the conversion to Celsius, but typically if you have a cold, like a coronavirus or influenza virus or common cold, your body temperature, your fever usually is very low, around 100, 101, right? Which is one of the symptoms for coronaviruses. Right? You have a sore throat, runny nose, headache, loss of sense of smell, and you have a temperature of 199, 100, 101. Because they don't produce any endotoxin that can raise your temperature. But why is your temperature increased? The increase is due to your inflammation. When you trigger inflammation, the macrophages will release those same chemicals. But when those chemicals are produced as a result of inflammation, the fever is low grade, not that high. On the other hand, if somebody comes in, has a cough, appear to have fluid in your lung, and you check the temperature is over 102, 103, 104, they have gram-negative bacteria causing pneumonia. And if you don't treat it carefully, the person will be dead. So if bacteria get into your lung, the endotoxin will leak into the blood, and that will trigger fever higher than what you expect from just an inflammatory response type of fever. Right? So the higher amount of, the greater the amount of inflammation, the higher your fever. So if you have a viral infection, for example, like you get a kissing disease, mono, and the inflammation is all over your body, then you could get a fever of 102, 103. But normally a respiratory infection wouldn't give you a fever that high unless you got bacteria, gram-negative bacteria infection. All right, that's fever. Can be protective, can cause issues. So if the fever is too high, you need to bring it down. And typically you can use a cold pack to lower the temperature. And then take anti-inflammatory chemicals to lower that. All right, the next defense, next tool actually, is against viruses. This is nonspecific, but it's all relative. And maybe tumor cells. So for interferon, spelling is right, lots of R there. For interferon, this was discovered when the field of virology first began, when scientists were now realizing that there are microorganisms called viruses. And in order to study viruses, just like when you do an experiment, you have to grow out stock culture. You have to grow a lot of them so you can do experiment with them, right? So when they try to grow up these viruses, what they found is that sometimes they have difficulty growing them because you have to grow the viruses on cells. Viruses are obligate intracellular parasite, and they have to grow inside the living cell. So there are times when they harvest the virus from one group of infected cells, transfer some of them into another group of uninfected cells so you can get more virus generated. When they do that, sometimes the infection suddenly stops. The cells cannot be infected anymore. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So what the scientists then tried to figure out was why it is occurring. And from that query, they discovered that some cells that are infected from the previous time release proteins that are antiviral. These proteins cannot protect the cells that are already infected, but they can protect the future cells, the cells that have not been infected. So when they transfer the viruses from that first culture into the second culture, the chemical produced by the first culture is transferred to the new batch of cells, and the new batch of cells then are turned into resistant. So the new batch of cells cannot be infected by the virus. So eventually they found this protein, and it's called interferon. So if you take interferon, interferon is protective only for the cells that have not become infected. The cells that produces interferon are the cells of your body that become infected by viruses. So it's fantastic. It's made by your own body, right? So it seems like this is not something that you need to go do vigorous testing because your cells produce it in your body right now. So it's not toxic to you, right? Well, all things biological, the quantity matters. A small amount is good, too much is not good. A good thing in small numbers is good, in large numbers may be harmful. So this is an example of that. All right, so at that time, the area of biotechnology, molecular cloning, all this is just beginning to come into the forefront. So a lot of biotech companies are racing to clone and produce this in large quantities. Because until now, we don't have any antiviral treatments. So now there's this natural chemical that can stop virus from infecting. And it's non-specific. Not just one kind of virus, all kinds of viruses. So if you can start a biotech company and you produce in large quantities, now you can save the world. So they did. And the only one that was successful is Genotech. They won the race, and they're still around. Most biotech companies don't last very long because approval process takes too long. So when Genotech cloned and produces large quantities, the stock prices went through the roof, 400-500 times increase. But normally it's produced in so minute quantities. One cell infected here produces interferon to produce the surrounding cell so the virus will not spread. Right? So one cell is infected, you release it, the surrounding cells are protected, so the virus just basically reaches a dead end. But if you make it in large quantities and use it for therapy, like you inject a whole bunch of interferon up somebody's arm, you create side effect. It turns out that you have, number one, a variety of different kinds of interferon. And number two, interferon not only stops the virus create the uninfected resistance, they also stimulate other branches of the immune system and causes the cells to change their behavior. So if it's a localized area, the cells change their behavior, it's not going to impact how you feel. So imagine you have a hurricane warning, and you close up shop because hurricane, meaning the virus is coming, so you shut down, close the shop so that the virus cannot infect you, so you're not damaged by the virus. Imagine that signal goes to the whole country. If you start shutting down your businesses, you start closing the store to protect you against this hurricane, you cannot carry out your normal economic activity. So the whole business will collapse. Like right now, coronavirus, you shut down everything, your business. Right? So with interferon, when it's injected globally into your body and it goes to every part of the body, it will start affecting your normal functioning cells. Your liver, your spleen, your brain, everything is right now functioning at its optimal. When you get affected by interferon, they're not functioning at its optimal. So the result is you don't feel very good. So because of the side effect associated with interferon, it is not the magic bullet that the early scientists hope it will. So when you have COVID-19, can you use interferon? Yes and no, right? Depends on when you use it. It turns out that interferon, in addition to stopping the virus from replicating, in this case, you want to stop COVID-19 from replicating, great. They also trigger inflammation. Inflammation is what causes people to be put on the respirator, because when inflammation occurs in your lung, fluid starts pouring into the lung, and now you're drowning in own bodily fluid, courtesy of your own immune system. So in order to make sure you get enough oxygen into the lungs so you can survive, aerobic respiration can occur. You get use a respirator, they can deliver higher concentration of oxygen. So that with limited area for surface diffusion, you have more efficient diffusion. When you get interferon, even though interferon stops the virus from replicating, it triggers this massive inflammation. So inflammation is what kills you. So interferon has limited use. Although there are scientists working on different kinds of interferon, trying to come up with one that can trigger the inhibition by creating this antivirus state in those uninfected cells, but does not trigger inflammation. If they can do that, then interferon is your magic bullet. You can do that for a lot of reasons. Right? Questions? Make sense? All right, so let me show you a diagram of how interferon works. So this is the first cell. When a virus comes in, especially viruses that contain RNA as your genetic material, like COVID-19 has RNA as your genetic material. So when a virus comes in, the virus genetic material gets introduced into the cytoplasm, and the cell has signaling that can be activated by this RNA that's detected in the cytoplasm. So this switches, signals bind to the switches. This protein goes into the nucleus of the cell, bind to the switch that is called the interferon control elements, and turn on the genes for interferon production. So the messenger RNA gets made, now interferon gets produced and is released by this infected cell. So this infected cell is doomed, is dead or dying. But if it is able to produce the interferon then will float around and diffuse to the surrounding tissue, and the surrounding cells have receptors for interferon. So when interferon binds to the surface of the cells will turn on the signaling, turn on the switches, will bind to the switches. Oh, actually I used the wrong term here. The switches will be the interferon responsive elements and turn on a variety of different enzymes. These enzymes prepare the cell for impending virus infection. So some of these enzymes are listed here. You cannot read this, it's okay. The oligosynthetase, the protein kinase that is inactivated, that's inactive. So now this cell is waiting, closed up shop, waiting for virus to come, right? So it changes your activity, make different protein from your normal, knowing the virus is coming. If the virus released from the first cell lands into this cell that is already been treated with interferon, they would now quickly switch on these enzymes that are made that would destroy the virus. So this diagram you can see in very detail ultimately causes the production of active enzyme that will digest the genetic material of the virus. So the RNA get chewed up. If the virus genetic material is destroyed, they're gone, right? And then here's the other effect, which is altering your translation. So even if some of the RNA that they call virus genes are made by the host cell, the translation machinery is inhibited. So you don't get translation occurring in the cell. This cell may die off, but it's better let your cell to die than just let the virus kill you. Right? It's better to pluck your eyeball out than to let your eyes cause you to sink. So as a result, the virus reaches a dead end when they impact the cell if interferon is produced. Right? So it doesn't help the cell that's already infected. And you can see why, in some circumstances, pre-treatment with interferon can protect you. All right, so that's interferon. Any questions? The notes have a variety of different interferon. There's alpha, beta, gamma, and even subclasses that are produced that have different effects. Some of them triggers fever, some of them trigger inflammation, which are not necessarily so desirable. So until a few years ago, we have no drugs for hepatitis C. If you get hepatitis C, your lifespan is limited. There's about 50% chance you would suffer liver failure and die. How soon? 5, 3, 4, 5, 10? Don't know. How many years? Then the leading cause, the leading reason why people need liver transplants. And the virus is quite prevalent, and sometimes you can get it quite easily. It can be sexually transmitted, it can be transmitted by contamination with blood products. So one of my former colleagues that worked here was a respiratory technician. She got infected, she had no idea how she got infected. So she suspects it's from the job, but there was no specific incident she can remember. But anyhow, at that time, there were no this very expensive, wonderful anti-hepatitis C drug. And the treatment then is, if you don't get treatment, you're going to die. If you get treatment, you get sick. She had to be on interferon with ribavirin, antiviral, not so effective antiviral, for about 6 months. Every day she had fever. She felt completely run down. She couldn't hardly want to get up and do anything. Very, very tired with fever every day and headache. But for her, it was you either do that or eventually get liver transplant. Right? But for her, she was lucky. She was one of the lucky ones. After treatment, she recovered entirely from interferon. So limited use for interferon, but it's still good. All right. Now the third part of this is NK cells, or natural killer cells. The natural killer cells, if you remember, are part of your lymphoid line. The lymphoid line gives rise to your B lymphocytes and your T lymphocytes, which are part of your specific immune system. But this one is non-specific. And what was discovered is that these cells that are part of this immune system floating around in the blood, when they encounter either virus-infected cell or tumor cells, they will kill them. And the way they kill them is by triggering apoptosis or cell suicide. We'll talk about this word a little bit more, but make sure you know this word, right? So your cells in your body are equipped with the so-called suicide switch. During your development from a single cell, not too close, you're going to fry your bacteria. During your development, as you go from one single cell into a mass of cells to making different body parts, some cells have to give way for the new cells that come in. So when the time comes, signals will be produced. So those cells that are the original scaffolding cells that produce your beginning part of your body part, they will die off, and they have to die off. So there are signals that are sent by your development hormones to tell those cells to commit suicide. We call that apoptosis. So every cell in your body is equipped with this. So if they receive certain signals, they will start destroying your DNA, making enzymes, they'll digest the DNA, breaking down the internal organs. The lysosomes start digesting their internal organs and so organelles and kill the cell. Right? So this suicide switch that is present in basically most cells of your body can be activated by NK cells. So if the NK cells identify the cell as a cell that has been hijacked by a virus or has mutated and is behaving radically, anarchic cell, they would bind to them and send out chemical signals that would activate this apoptosis. So that's how NK cells kill virus-infected cells and tumor cells. They're part of your non-specific immune response. That means they're always around, but the numbers are very limited. So they can kill cancer cells non-specifically. Why don't we have more of them? Right? Then you cannot amplify that. You have a limited amount. So if you begin to have a mutant cells that is on the way heading into cancer, if the NK cells are present and can find them quickly enough, they can wipe them out. So right now, you may have a lot of potential mutant cells, but they are kept in check by your NK cells. So in fact, there are, I've read reports where scientists are trying to figure out a way to grow more of these NK cells outside of the patient's body, and then once they get a lot of them, then ship them back to help them control cancer. Right? They are specific, they are only good for your own immune, for your own cells. So you cannot take NK cells from another person and donate it to another one. It doesn't work that way. It has to be your own. And we get to some of that. And one of the identification that is used by the NK cells is this thing called the MHC, which stands for your major motility complex. So this is the protein that was identified as the one that will determine whether tissues are compatible. So if you want to donate tissue from person A to person B, you have to match this protein. If the protein matches, then there will be no rejection. Right? So this protein is called the major histocompatibility complex. So each one of us on our cell, body of our cells, has this, and I call this your ID badge. So if you go to school, if you don't have your proper ID, they won't let you in. You work for a big company, your ID is damaged, hey, you're an intruder, get out. So your immune system uses this as the ID badge. And later on we talk about additional functions, but this is one of the functions. So your NK cells are the security guards. They go around. If they encounter a cell, they'll look for the ID badge. If this protein is not on the surface of a cell, NK cells would then release the chemical to trigger them to commit suicide. Right? So that's how NK cells kill. And that's why it's non-specific. If viruses is infecting the cell, viruses will try to hijack the cell and disrupt the normal activity of the cell. The normal activity of the cell include production of normal MHC on the surface. Tumor cells don't behave normally. So if a tumor cells now is not producing MSC and distributing on the surface like a normal cell would, NK cell would be able to recognize that because they don't see the normal MSC. And then that will trigger the killing. So, very important cell, but specific for viruses and tumor cells. Why won't they kill bacteria? How do they kill? They trigger the suicide switch of you, not of bacteria. Bacteria has no suicide switch. So if they send the signal to bacteria, bacteria go, oh, what? Right? So they have no effect on bacteria. They only have effect on your cells that is infected by viruses or that has become mutant. So even though we're talking about non-specific, the non-specific have different branches as well. Right? More for viruses, and this one more for bacteria. Phagocytes complement more for bacteria. And fever response general. Inflammation general. All right, so that's your non-specific immune system. So the next lecture we will talk about your antibody production. Any questions? Okay, we can stop here. So the response is immediate, right?